The last 10 popes of the Catholic Church. Pope Benedict XV. His pontificate spanned from 1914 to 1922. The autumn of 1914 brought Benedict XV, the Pope of the First World War, to the chair of Peter. Giacomo della Chiesa had been a cardinal for only a few months when he was elected pontiff, just as the Great War broke out. His voice choked with anguish, he called the conflict the suicide of civilized Europe. From Rome, Benedict XV became a tireless apostle of peace. He offered mediation that the belligerent powers ignored, called for Christmas truces, and denounced the war as a pointless slaughter. His active neutrality sought to be a beacon of sanity in a world gone mad. Although his pleas went unheeded in the offices of the powerful, his heart was not discouraged. With Europe in flames, Benedict XV focused the Church's role on humanitarian action. He organized food shipments to starving populations, exchanged prisoners of war, and created an office to search for missing persons, bringing relief to thousands of families. As the cannons thundered, he wrote fiery letters against blind nationalism and racial hatred, recalling the Christian values that could save humanity from the abyss. After the war, this diplomatic pope worked to reconcile the Church with the nations. He re-established relations with France and laid the groundwork for resolving the so-called Roman question. Benedict XV died in 1922, exhausted, but having sown seeds of peace. History would remember him as the father of Vatican diplomacy and a prophet of peace, whose prayers anticipated the need for fraternity amid chaos. Pope Pius XI. His pontificate spanned from 1922 to 1939. At the dawn of the Roaring Twenties, Pius XI, born Achille Radi, took the reins of the Church, determined to guide it through the turbulent interwar period. This erudite and energetic pope witnessed the extremes of humanity. He saw hopes for prosperity, but also the rise of totalitarian ideologies. With a firm hand and profound faith, Pius XI stood out for his many facets. He was called the Pope of Encyclicals and the Pope of Canonizations, for he wrote more than 30 encyclical letters and raised 33 new saints to the altars, such as Teresa of Lisieux and John Bosco, inspiring with his examples a world in need of virtues. But his most famous legacy was facing the great political challenges of his time, protecting the freedom of the Church from any regime. In 1929, Pius XI achieved a historic milestone, the signing of the Lateran Pacts with Mussolini's Italy, resolving the Roman question that had been open since 1870. These agreements created the Vatican city-state, giving the papacy sovereignty and independence once again. Triumphant, Pius XI expressed his gratitude for the mutual recognition, surprisingly calling Mussolini a man of providence. However, his Christian conscience did not remain silent in the face of the shadows of fascism and Nazism. He raised his voice with unusual courage. In the encyclical Non abbiamo bisogno, 1931, he denounced fascist oppression in Italy. With Mit brennender Sorge, 1937, written clandestinely in German, he condemned the racism and paganism of Nazism in Germany, and with Divini Redemptoris, 1937, he warned of the dangers of atheistic communism. Pius XI also suffered under the influence of persecution, such as the Cristero War in Mexico, against which he protested vigorously. That elderly pontiff, with his soft but firm voice, emerged as a moral conscience in dark times. When he died in February 1939, with the Second World War looming, he left the Church spiritually and diplomatically prepared to face the impending storm. His memory endures as that of a shepherd who sought the peace of Christ in the turbulent kingdom of men. Pope Pius XII. His pontificate spanned from 1939 to 1958. On the eve of World War II, Cardinal Eugenio Pacelli assumed the papacy as Pius XII. It was March 1939 and the world was spiraling into the abyss. A Roman aristocrat and seasoned diplomat, Pius XII made Vatican neutrality his shield during the global conflict. His white-clad figure walked the Vatican corridors alone, praying for wounded humanity. When the bombs fell, he opened the Vatican's doors to refugees, hiding hundreds of persecuted Jews in convents and religious houses, gestures of silent charity that saved lives, albeit at the cost of later criticism for his public silence in the face of the Holocaust. The Pope walked a tightrope. Every word could spark Nazi reprisals. At Christmas 1942, he delivered a coded radio address, alluding to the hundreds of thousands who, through no fault of their own, because of their nation or race, are led to death. It was a veiled cry against genocide. In the post-war period, Pius XII emerged as a spiritual beacon for a world undergoing reconstruction. In 1950, amidst nascent hope, he proclaimed the dogma of the Assumption of the Virgin Mary, underscoring the transcendence of life beyond death. Leading the Church through the Cold War, in 1949 he excommunicated Catholics who embraced communism, making his stance against militant atheism clear. Pius XII is also remembered for his intellectual elegance. He fostered biblical studies, modernized the Church's approach to science, approving, for example, cosmological theories that spoke of the primordial atom, the Big Bang, and reformed the liturgy of the Easter Vigil, a prelude to greater changes. But above all, the world saw in his gray eyes the goodness of a shepherd. He was called the angelic shepherd. In the harsh post-war years, he personally cared for the neediest, sending food and comfort to devastated countries. When he died in 1958, after nearly 2 decades of pontificate, millions mourned the Pope of war and peace. His figure, surrounded by an aura of sanctity for some and controversial for others, left an indelible mark. Today the Church honors him as venerable, recognizing his heroic virtues, while historians continue to explore his complex legacy during those dark times. Pope John XXIII. His pontificate spanned from 1958 to 1963. In October 1958, a good-natured old man with a warm smile was elected pope against all odds. Angelo Giuseppe Roncalli took the name John XXIII, and the world would soon affectionately know him as the Good Pope. Although many thought that, at 76, he would be a transitional pontiff, John XXIII surprised everyone with a youthful and innovative spirit. Just 3 months after his election, he shook the Church by announcing the Second Vatican Council. Before astonished cardinals, this kindly grandfather spoke with the power of a prophet. The Church must open her windows and let in fresh air. With that gesture, John XXIII began a great ecumenical assembly in 1962 aimed at modernizing the Church, promoting Christian unity, and engaging in dialogue with the contemporary world. Although he would not live to see its completion, he launched the greatest ecclesial renewal of the 20th century. John XXIII exercised the papacy as a pastor close to the people and the world. In the midst of the Cold War, his peacemaker's heart was moved by the 1962 missile crisis. He responded by writing the encyclical Pacem in Terris, 1963, addressed not only to Catholics, but to all people of goodwill, imploring peace between the superpowers and respect for human dignity. Under his guidance, the Church raised its voice for social rights in Mater et Magistra, 1961, understanding that the Church's mother and teacher in matters of justice. John XXIII also had a simple charisma. He visited the sick in hospitals, embraced prisoners in Rome's jail with words of forgiveness, making divine mercy tangible. The Romans, surprised and moved, saw him walk through the city, breaking protocol, always with good humor. His humanity transcended religious and political boundaries. When he died in June 1963, the entire world, including leaders from both East and West, paid tribute to him. He was beatified in 2000 and finally canonized in 2014 alongside John Paul II, recognizing the sanctity of that pope who, with his goodness, courage, and vision, inaugurated a new springtime in the Church. Pope Paul VI. His pontificate spanned from 1963 to 1978. The shy and thoughtful Giovanni Battista Montini assumed the See of Peter after John XXIII, taking the name Paul VI. He had the enormous task of steering the Church through times of dizzying change, completing the conciliar work begun by his predecessor. And so he did. Paul VI immediately reopened the Second Vatican Council and guided it with a sure hand to its close in 1965. His heart burned with passion to bring the reforms to a successful conclusion. Under his leadership, historic constitutions were approved that modernized the liturgy, allowing Mass in vernacular languages to bring it closer to the people, redefined the Church's relationship with the world, the famous Gaudium et Spes, and promoted ecumenism and religious freedom. The image of Paul VI, with his arms open in St. Peter's Square on the day of the Council's closing session, symbolized a church building bridges to the world. Paul VI was a pope of dialogue and pioneering travels. He broke with centuries-old tradition by becoming the first pontiff to travel across continents. In 1964, he traveled to the Holy Land and met with the Orthodox Patriarch Athenagoras in a fraternal embrace that ended 900 years of symbolic schism. The following year, he spoke before the UN General Assembly in New York, proclaiming, "Never again war." He traveled to Asia, America, and Africa, carrying a message of peace and understanding. Internally, Paul VI reached out to other Christian denominations and other religions like never before, earning worldwide respect. Sensitive to social issues, in 1967, he published Populorum Progressio on the development of peoples, defending the poor, and denouncing North-South injustices. But perhaps his best-known document was Humanae Vitae, 1968, in which he reaffirmed the Church's traditional position on marital morality and spoke out against artificial contraception. That encyclical sparked intense controversy in the West, reflecting the tension between renewal and continuity. Paul VI experienced firsthand the misunderstandings of a turbulent era. He witnessed the protests of 68, cultural changes, and challenges to ecclesiastical authority, remaining steadfast but with great personal pain. However, he never lost hope. When he died in August 1978, exhausted after 15 years of service, he left behind a church more open to the world but not without tensions. His holiness of life was recognized when he was proclaimed a saint in 2018. History will remember him as the Pope who concluded the council, journeyed for peace, and held the helm during the turbulent post-conciliar journey. Pope John Paul I, his pontificate spanned the year 1978. After the intense era of Paul VI, a smile came to the papal throne that illuminated the world, if only for a little over a month. Albino Luciani, Patriarch of Venice, became John Paul I in August 1978, uniting in his name the tribute to John XXIII and Paul VI. From the first moment, he earned the nickname the Smiling Pope for his affable expression and spontaneous approachability. He renounced the pomp of the papal coronation, preferring a simple mass at the beginning of his pontificate. His humble style immediately connected with the people. He spoke in simple words, used tender anecdotes in his catechisms, and even joked in public, something unusual for a pope. John Paul I wanted a more understandable and accessible church, a humanization of the papacy, according to his own notes. It is said that he planned to continue implementing the council with pastoral and administrative reforms, and many predicted a spring of evangelical simplicity. But fate had other plans. After only 33 days of pontificate, in the early hours of September 28, 1978, John Paul I died suddenly in his sleep. The news shocked the world and gave rise to conjecture and conspiracy theories, as few could believe that such a life-filled and warm figure would disappear so soon. Officially, he died of an acute myocardial infarction. His brief time in the Vatican, however, left an indelible mark, a new way of being pope, simple, smiling, and paternal. In such a short time, he had reminded us by his example of the virtue of humility, insisting on calling himself "I, the humble servant," and underscored the importance of Christian joy. Decades later, the Church recognized his heroic virtues and a miracle attributed to his intercession. John Paul I was beatified by Pope Francis in 2022. That luminous smile, which though fleeting, shone with the light of the goodness and simplicity of the gospel, will forever remain in our collective memory. Pope John Paul II. His pontificate spanned from 1978 to 2005. In October 1978, a Polish-accented voice resounded in St. Peter's Square, "Do not be afraid." It was John Paul II, the first non-Italian pope in over 450 years, hailing from faraway Poland. Karel Wojtyła, at just 58 years old, came to the papacy as a whirlwind of energy, athleticism, and charisma that revitalized the papal image. His pontificate would extend for almost 27 years, one of the longest in history, during which the world changed drastically and he would become a global protagonist. With unwavering faith and an exceptional talent for communication, John Paul II became a tireless pilgrim. He made 104 apostolic journeys outside of Italy, visiting 129 countries, bringing the gospel message to a multitude of cultures and peoples. Never had a pope been so physically close to the people. Millions flocked to see him as if he were a spiritual rock star. From the jungles of Africa to the poor neighborhoods of Latin America, his white-clad figure was synonymous with hope. John Paul II played a crucial role in the political transformations of the 20th century. A staunch opponent of communism, his support for the Solidarity movement in his native Poland and his constant calls for freedom helped weaken the Iron Curtain. The Polish Pope became a symbol of Christian anti-communism and inspired millions in Eastern Europe to maintain their faith and peaceful resistance. When the Berlin Wall finally fell in 1989, many saw him as one of the moral architects of that historic moment. His influence transcended politics. He decisively promoted interreligious dialogue, being the first modern pope to visit a synagogue, Rome, 1986, and to enter a mosque, Damascus, 2001, and called on leaders of different religions to pray for peace in Assisi. He also asked forgiveness for the Church's historical errors, from the Inquisition to the Galileo affair, in a courageous gesture of purification of memory. A lover of youth, he initiated World Youth Days, uniting millions of young people around the faith. However, amid his tireless work, he suffered the test of pain. In 1981, an attack nearly took his life, but he miraculously survived, being shot by an assailant in St. Peter's Square. He himself attributed his salvation to the intercession of Our Lady of Fatima, publicly forgiving his attacker in an impressive gesture of mercy. As the years passed, John Paul II aged before the world, affected by Parkinson's disease, but he never ceased to serve. He gave his final lesson from the Vatican window, suffering but smiling at those who prayed for him. When he died on April 2, 2005, an uncontainable crowd filled Rome with the cry of "Sudden Saint!" And indeed, the Church accelerated its steps. Just 9 years later, John Paul II was canonized in 2014, alongside the good Pope John XXIII. During his pontificate, he had elevated 482 saints to the altars, more than all his predecessors of 5 centuries combined, demonstrating his desire to provide models of holiness for all peoples and conditions. Karol Wojtyla left a vast legacy, from the theology of the body in the doctrinal field to a new geography of the papacy in the pastoral field. For his charisma, his defense of human dignity in the face of all oppression, and his ability to connect with believers and non-believers, John Paul II is remembered not only as a saint, but as one of the most influential leaders of the 20th century, a spiritual giant whose echoes resonate throughout recent history. Pope Benedict XVI. His pontificate spanned from 2005 to 2013. As the years passed, John Paul II aged in the sight of the world, affected by Parkinson's disease, but he never ceased to serve. He gave his last lesson from the Vatican window, suffering but smiling at those who prayed for him. When he died on April 2, 2005, an uncontainable crowd filled Rome with the cry of "Sudden Saint!" And indeed, the Church accelerated its steps. Just 9 years later, John Paul II was canonized in 2014 alongside the good Pope John XXIII. During his pontificate, he had elevated 482 saints to the altars, more than all his predecessors of 5 centuries combined, demonstrating his desire to provide models of holiness for all peoples and conditions. Karol Wojtyla left a vast legacy, from the theology of the body in the doctrinal field to a new geography of the papacy in the pastoral field. For his charisma, his defense of human dignity in the face of all oppression, and his ability to connect with believers and non-believers, John Paul II is remembered not only as a saint, but as one of the most influential leaders of the 20th century, a spiritual giant whose echoes resonate throughout recent history. Benedict XVI guided the Church with clear and serene teaching. He wrote 3 encyclicals, God is Love, Saved in Hope, and Charity in Truth, that delved into Christian love, hope, and social ethics in the face of globalization. He also fought against clerical pedophilia. He met with victims, toughened measures against abusers, and asked for forgiveness for those sins from within the Church, although the crisis damaged the trust of many. His pontificate took an unexpected and revolutionary turn in 2013. Feeling his physical strength diminishing and after much prayer, Benedict XVI made a decision unprecedented in centuries. He resigned the papacy. He announced on February 11, 2013, that he was leaving the Petrine ministry due to a lack of strength of body and spirit due to his advanced age. He was the first pope to voluntarily abdicate since Gregory XII in 1415. The world was astonished by this gesture of humility and courage, recognizing that the papacy is not about power, but about service. From then on, he became known as Pope Emeritus, retiring to a life of prayer and study in a monastery within the Vatican. Benedict XVI, the Mozart of theology, lived a peaceful life until his death at the end of 2022, having left behind a testament to intellectuality in the service of faith and modesty in the exercise of power. He will be remembered as a great sage and teacher of the Church, whose final act of resignation underscored that the Pope is, above all, a servant of the truth and the gospel, even in the renunciation of honors. Pope Francis. His pontificate spanned from 2013 to 2025. On the evening of March 13, 2013, a crowd in St. Peter's Square applauded in surprise upon hearing the name of the new Pope, Francis. For the first time in history, a Latin American, Cardinal Jorge Mario Bergoglio of Buenos Aires, became the successor of Peter. He was also the first Jesuit pope, and the first from the Southern Hemisphere. From the central balcony of the Basilica, Francis greeted everyone with a humble "Buonasera," good evening, and did something unprecedented. He asked the people to pray for him before giving his blessing. This simple gesture set the tone for his pontificate. Francis, the Pope of the poor, brought a close and down-to-earth pastoral style. He refused the papal apartments to live in a Santa Marta residence. He traveled in modest vehicles, personally called those who wrote to him, and spontaneously visited slums. The world saw in him the continuity of the spirit of St. Francis of Assisi, from whom he took his name, poverty, peace, and love for creation. From the beginning, Francis undertook profound reforms and symbolic actions. He convened a council of cardinals to reform the Roman Curia and make it more transparent and efficient, an effort crystallized years later in the Constitution Praedicate Evangelium. He battled corruption and lack of financial transparency in the Vatican, advancing the cleanup of the Vatican Bank. In 2013, he published Evangelii Gaudium, a programmatic exhortation on the joy of the gospel, calling for a church that is outgoing, missionary, and close to society's discarded. Francis placed pressing issues of the contemporary world at the center, integral ecology with the 2015 encyclical Laudato Si, a passionate call to care for our common home in the face of climate change, and human fraternity, with Fratelli Tutti 2020, promoting a culture of encounter in a polarized world. Never had a pope spoken so clearly about the ecological crisis and social inequalities, earning praise from global leaders beyond the religious. Francis also stood out for his gestures of mercy and openness. At the Extraordinary Jubilee of Mercy 2016, he emphasized that the Church should be a field hospital healing wounds. On countless occasions, he denounced the globalization of indifference toward migrants and refugees. He did not hesitate to travel to the island of Lesbos to embrace Syrian refugees and take some families on the papal plane to grant them asylum. He deepened interreligious dialogue by meeting with the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar in 2019 and signing the historic document on human fraternity in Abu Dhabi. He practiced closeness to all. He washed the feet of prisoners and women on Holy Thursday, visited COVID-19 patients in hospitals, and promoted synodality within the Church, listening to the voice of God's people in a global consultation process. During the 2020 pandemic, his image praying alone in the rain in an empty St. Peter's Square will remain as a symbol of consolation for suffering humanity. Furthermore, Francis will go down in history as an even greater saint-maker than his predecessors. At his first canonization ceremony in 2013, he inscribed more than 800 martyrs of Otranto at once, and since then has proclaimed more saints than any other pope, surpassing John Paul II's record. Among them, he canonized influential contemporary figures such as Mother Teresa and Oscar Romero. During his pontificate, two of his predecessors were also declared saints, John the 23rd and John Paul II in 2014, Paul VI in 2018, underscoring the sacred continuity of the papal mission. 10 years into his pontificate, Francis continued to encourage the Church to dream big. In 2023, he launched an unprecedented synod on synodality, seeking a more participatory and inclusive church. And although advanced age and some ailments seemed to weigh heavily on his shoulders, his gaze remained lively, and his voice continued to cry out for the poor, for peace, trying to mediate conflicts like the one in Ukraine, and for an authentic spirituality free from worldliness. In April 2025, Pope Francis concluded his service on earth, after 12 years filled with revolutionary gestures, departing for the house of the Father. The world bid him farewell with gratitude and prayer, aware of having witnessed the time of change. Francis leaves behind an indelible legacy, that of a simpler and more welcoming church, committed to justice and care for the planet, a church in open dialogue with all cultures. His pontificate has been like a fresh spring dawn, reminding us that the gospel of Christ is joy, is service, is love in action. And so ends this journey through the recent history of the popes, a journey of faith and humanity that continues to inspire the world. Pope Leo XIV. His pontificate spans from 2025 to the present. On May 8, 2025, the history of the Catholic Church took an unexpected turn. From the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica, the proclamation was made to the world, Habemus Papam. The chosen one was Robert Francis Prevost, who took the name Leo XIV, becoming the first American pope and the first Augustinian to occupy the throne of Peter. Born in Chicago in 1955, Prevost grew up in a family with deep Catholic roots. His vocation led him to enter the Order of St. Augustine, where he stood out for his dedication and leadership. His academic training included studies in theology and canon law, earning a doctorate from the Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas in Rome. Prevost's missionary life took him to Peru, where he served for more than 2 decades, eventually becoming Bishop of Chiclayo. His pastoral work in Latin America gave him a global perspective and a deep commitment to marginalized communities. In 2023, he was appointed prefect of the Dicastery for Bishops and president of the Pontifical Commission for Latin America, roles that consolidated his influence in the Universal Church. Upon assuming the papacy, Leo XIV chose his name in honor of Leo XIII, known for his encyclical Rerum Novarum, which addressed the social question and workers' rights. This gesture symbolizes Leo XIV's intention to continue a line of commitment to social justice and human dignity. In his first speech as pontiff, Leo XIV called for unity, peace, and a synodal church, that is, a church that journeys together, listening to and dialoguing with all its members. He underscored the importance of an open, missionary, and participatory church, following the legacy of his predecessor, Pope Francis. Leo XIV has expressed his commitment to crucial issues such as social justice, environmental care, and the defense of migrants. He has criticized policies that run counter to these principles, demonstrating a firm stance in promoting human rights and the dignity of all people. His election was enthusiastically received around the world. In New York, the Empire State Building was lit up in the Vatican colors in his honor. In Chicago and Lima, cathedrals rang their bells, celebrating the election of a pope who represents a bridge between North and South, between tradition and renewal. Leo XIV began his pontificate in a world marked by global challenges, armed conflicts, migration crises, and tensions within the Church itself. His leadership is emerging as a continuation of the reforming spirit of Francis, but with his own style, characterized by serenity, humility, and a profound Augustinian spirituality. Thus, Pope Leo XIV presents himself as a pastor willing to guide the Church in times of change, always seeking unity, justice, and peace, with an eye toward those most in need and building bridges that bring all peoples closer together.
Thank you for watching our video. Subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. Give it a like, comment your thoughts, and share this video with your friends and family.